It's preparing. Still going back to what we had from earlier.
When you click on the link.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Okay.
Henry.
Oh, it says we're live.
There we go.
It's working for me.
That's it. Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I see it as well.
Okay, good.
Still going back to what we had from earlier.
Anyway, we're going to have that 20-second delay.
Yeah.
So everyone will need to, if you're watching the live stream, you have to mute it. It's just like when you call into a radio station and then it says we're live.
Yeah, I sound horrible.
There we go.
Never realized how horrible my voice is.
No, that's everybody feels that way about themselves. All right, that should be working now.
I do have people in the waiting room, but I'm going to wait until all our members are in before I allow the public. I mean, we have plenty of room. We only have 16 people so far.
My dog is going to scratch at the door until I let her in. It's a rule. She has to be able to, come in. So. All right, I'm back.
See, Wendy, Ira, and Paul and Mike are on. Christine, anybody else?
And Wendy.
Yeah, I said Wendy.
Oh, sorry. That's all I'm saying. Art will not make it tonight.
Yep.
He appointed Ira as his.
Right. So we're missing Greg and Jackie and Paul Skirtich.
Right.
We'll give them another minute or two.
Does that mean round one starts?
Here comes Greg.
Art's the only one who said he couldn't make it, right?
Correct.
letting everybody in from the waiting room
I
now?
I have nobody in the waiting room currently.
All right. I know Jackie has had some difficulty making it at 7 o'clock lately, so. Paul Skirch is the only other one missing?
Correct.
Okay. Then why don't we call the meeting to order? We can start recording. Okay.
Yep.
So call the meeting to order, Board of Finance. And the only item really on the agenda tonight is a discussion with the Board of Education. First item of business, Art Lasky is not able to attend tonight, and he has appointed Ira Kaplan to fill in for him as alternate. General information, I know, I'm sure there are probably some people who are definitely veterans of this process, but there are probably some people who are new to it. So I want to go through a little bit of housekeeping, if you will. Purpose of the meeting tonight is from the Board of Finance perspective is information gathering. It's the opportunity for the Board of Education to explain to us their budget. We did not make any decisions now. Those will only occur after we hold the public hearing, which is scheduled for March 22nd. Early on, we thought we were going to have to do that via Zoom. Now we find that with the latest directives from the governor that we can hold it in person with up to 100 people in attendance. So our plan is to do that at Samuel Staples as we have in the past. If for some reason we end up with more than 100 people, we'll have a contingency plan for how to deal with that so that people who do show up will still be able to comment. The general process when we hold that public hearing in the past has been that people come in to the cafetorium at Staples, and there's a stack of handouts, which basically consist of presentations that will be made by the Board of Finance covering the overall budget for all departments. A second one from the Easton Board of Ed covering their budget, and a third one from the Region 9 covering their budget. And then people get to sit down and hear those presentations, and while they're sitting there, try to go through the information they've been given and come up with questions and comments they might want to make. What we're going to try to do this time, and we started thinking about doing this because we thought we were going to be doing a Zoom session, is I've asked the chairs of the two boards of ed, and I've committed myself to having our presentations as well as the budget itself up on the town's website under the Board of Finance heading by the 15th of March. That way the public will have an opportunity to see it. People who can't make it to the meeting will have an opportunity to see it, and they'll be able to be better prepared and hopefully be able to ask better questions and be more informed for their comments. I think that's something that is something that we would probably try to do in the future as well. I think it just is a better situation all the way around. As far as tonight's meeting, well, again, that public hearing, the whole purpose of that is for the Board of Finance to hear from the public. We have said in our other meetings with other departments that we would let the public make comments. We didn't have anyone who said they wanted to in any of those meetings. I suspect that might not be the case tonight. So what we plan to do is first will be turn the meeting over to the Board of Education to give whatever type of presentation they care to give. It's essentially their sales pitch. We'll then turn it over to the members of the Board of Finance to ask any questions they may have and have a dialogue with the Board of Ed. And then once the Board of Finance members have had the opportunity to ask their questions, that'll open it up for the public to both ask questions and make comments. If you make comments tonight, that doesn't mean you can't make a comment on the 22nd. If you don't make a comment tonight, clearly you can comment on the 22nd. After the 22nd, we'll have given the public a couple of opportunities to weigh in on this. And obviously they get the ultimate decision when the budget goes to a machine vote after the annual town meeting. So our practice has been that after that public hearing, the meetings the Board of Finance holds then to finalize the budget are done without further public comment. That said, anybody in the public who wants to get their comments to the board and isn't able to do it tonight or the 22nd, our email addresses are accessible, but it's kind of convoluted through the town's website. I said to our board members last night that we want to put up our own email addresses next to our names and on the top page of the Board of Finance section of the town website. And I'm fairly certain that this isn't, I'm not overstepping a bit, but I know personally my phone number is in the Easton directory. I don't have a problem if people want to call me. And I from past experience, have found that the other board members are comfortable with that as well. So the more information we have, the better job we can do.
I don't have a problem if they want to call you either.
Call me what?
Correct.
Yeah. All right. That and one other piece of Board of Finance business, just to make sure that I don't neglect it later on. We've gone through all of the other department budgets, some of which the board members in their own minds individually may have decided that the budgets that we have before us as presented, they don't see a reason to make any adjustments in them. But if any of the board members do feel that further changes should be made or more in-depth discussion is necessary with those departments, then please get back to Christine with your list of the departments you want to have come back. And I can tell you right now from past experience and guarantee for you, John, that the Board of Ed will be on that list. Our practice is to have the departments come in and sit down with us. Our practice also is not to make adjustments to a department without them having an opportunity to make their case. So I would ask all of our board members to get their list to Christine by Monday so that we can notify the different departments that we want to have them come back and set up a schedule for them to come in. With that,
Andy, excuse me. Can I just say, we also still have our general email address, bof@eastonct.gov. So if you send an email to that, I will forward it to the rest of the Board of Finance members.
okay. With all of that, hopefully nobody's going to come back and say, I didn't know how to contact you. If there's nothing else, John, we'll turn it over to you for the Board of Education budget presentation.
Thank you, Andy. And thank you to everyone on the Board of Finance. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all. I also want to just sort of make mention of the partnership that we've had this year and how much we appreciate that. Andy came and spoke to us at the beginning of our process, and I'll talk about the process that we used in just a moment. But it was really helpful to get the context, understand sort of the point of view of the Board of Finance at that stage of our process. And, you know, it was very informative. So thank you to everyone on the Board of Finance. So I don't know that I've met everyone on the Board of Finance. I'll just briefly introduce myself. So John Stinson, I've been in town since 2012. Shortly after coming to the town, we, joined ASO, and I joined that board, and I joined the Easton Learning Foundation, spent 6 years there as the vice president, helping to coordinate the trivia bee and the sports tag sale and all of those things to try to help support our schools. Also along the way, started a nonprofit where we were teaching science and technology and engineering to kids, and just had a great time with that. So a lot of experience interacting with our educators and our leaders. But while I said we moved to town in 2012, we were actually in town in 2010. And the reason that we were in town in 2010 is because we have twin boys who are now in 6th grade at Helen Keller. And those twin boys were 2 years old, and we were looking for a preschool program. And we looked all over, and we were living in Norwalk at the time, and we looked in Norwalk and we looked at some amazing programs. But the place that really connected with us was Play Tots. We came up to ECC, and we saw the program that they had there, and we just loved that combination of fun and learning and enrichment for the kids. And they loved it there. It helped that their cousins were actually going there. They have twin cousins who are also in 6th grade with them, who were in the program with them. And it was just an amazing experience. And so we were driving up from Norwalk twice a week, and then 3 times a week for the 3s program, and then 4 times a week for the 4s program up to ECC. And we just fell in love with the town, having lunch with them as toddlers at the Easton country store, and sort of that entire experience, and having breakfast at the Bluebird Inn and all of that. It was just like, this is where we want to be. This is a town that is beautiful. This is a town that has an amazing offering for their students, and it's what brought us here. So I just want to say, thank you, because I know a ton of the people on this call, the people on the Board of Ed, the people on the Board of Finance, have been stewards of this town, of making this town a place where people want to move and sort of be here with their families and raise their families. I'm going to share my screen and just take us through a presentation. I'm going to start. I hope everyone can see my screen. Yes? Hope so.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to start with just a quick highlight of the themes that we're going to come back to again and again throughout this presentation. So the 2 big buckets are doing right by our students and doing right by our town. And I think, in fact, doing right by our town is doing right by our students. So the way that we think about doing right by our students is, first and foremost, we have our enduring educational priorities. We've always had these. Right. This is academic excellence, community-centered approach, and really making sure that our students understand the value of healthy interactions with one another and their communities, and then certainly making sure that they're ready to get out there in the real world and that they're future ready. This year, it also means about making sure that we're focused on and helping them to recover from the last 12 months. COVID is still with us a bit, but we see the light at the end of the tunnel. Really making sure we're not taking a sugar-coated view of things. There is going to be some academic recovery. There is going to be long-lasting effects that are at least 1 or 2 years that we're going to be working to make sure that we can get everybody back on track. And as we do that, as we work to get all of our students back on track, it's going to be really important that we're not just focused on the academic perspective, but also the social emotional perspective, the isolation that many people went through, the missing of step-up ceremonies from 5th to 6th grade, from 8th to 9th grade. Like, these are all the kinds of things that we're going to be dealing with, and making sure that we can, help them get back into a nice, healthy groove. We certainly want to take advantage of any of the upside that came out of this, right? On the topic of future ready learners, there's been more of a dimension of making sure that you're digitally savvy, that you can use Zoom, that you can use Google Classroom and all those things. And we do have some benefit from that we've seen over the last 12 months. And ultimately making sure that we can get the students on track to realize their full potential. Finally, I want to say, when it comes to doing right by our students, you're going to see a little bit of a theme, and we'll talk about, I think there's been a tremendous amount of financial sort of fiduciary responsibility that has been really well managed over many, many years. However, it has meant that we've been stretched thin. And over time, we've done things like a couple of years ago, lost the media specialist as a way of trying to make the budgets work. We have come to realize that was not a good choice. We really feel strongly we need to get that media specialist back. And there are other places where we think there are some restorations that are needed to make sure that we can sort of build back up and be at the right level to support our students. I'll just close briefly. When we talk about doing right by our town, the Board of Finance has done, as I said, an excellent job over many, many, many years of making sure that we're being responsible, making sure that we're holding the feet to the fire and saying, you can't just show up and say, hey, we want to check for X and here you go. It's much more a function of, you need to make sure that you can justify what you're asking for. You need to make sure it's the right thing for the students. You need to make sure that it's the right thing for the town. And we appreciate that. I think because of that, in many respects, we find ourselves in a position where our town is better prepared than most to be able to sort of absorb the necessary investments that we need to make for our educational institutions. I think it has been clear for many years that our citizens, both with and without students in the schools, support education. That doesn't mean it's a blank check for education, but generally speaking, they believe that we should invest in education, that it makes a difference. And then finally, especially with what we've seen in the explosion in the number of home sales in the last 12 months and the sort of huge percentage of people who are coming to town because they want their kids to be able to run and play and be in a place where they have a great school and they have a great community and they can, have a yard and be a kid. I think that tells a lot for the demand for housing that is linked to our schools. And it's going to be really important that we're able to keep pace, not just to keep up with the Joneses, but to make sure that we can say, this is an important offering in today's schools. We need to take that seriously and make sure that, other towns aren't, sort of siphoning off the demand for homes in our town because of that. All right. So into the meat. Briefly, this is the process that we use this year. It's actually not very different than the process we used last year. At our December meeting where we talked about contracts and healthcare, really tried to understand those sort of costs that we're already committed to. Andy, you came and you spoke and you give us a really nice overview of sort of where the Board of Finance was and where the town was positioned. In January, we talked about new positions and programs. In February, we started to put together the complete picture of the budget. And now here we are in March presenting to the Board of Finance. Overall, the process started with us at 6.1% as we looked at everything that we thought would be necessary to move into 2021, 2022. The board appreciated the sort of the very hard work that central office had done to present us with that number. But we also are realists and we said, appreciated, but let's take a look at a number of categories. And we gave them a list of categories and asked them to come back. And they came back and we were able to have a series of conversations inside subsequent meetings where we were able to reduce by way of reductions with some of the sort of the math programming. This is a function of a new textbook that we're looking at that actually is coming at under the budgets that we think we're going to be at. The capital requests, reducing capital requests, essentially not sort of slashing all capital requests, but taking it down to a level where we're taking those sort of medium level things and saying, we believe that there are probably some larger capital investments that need to be made. Let's put those to the side and think, what are the sort of basic maintenance things we need to do? And then, take that sort of medium layer out of it. And we think that, as well as the roof repairs, fit with that and sort of reduction to the roof repair number. Some reductions in special education in the next two lines, some reductions in the cost of summer professional development for those new textbooks that we believe will work, and then a reduction in the technology equipment, Chromebooks and things like that. That gets us down to 4.09%, and that is the budget that we are presenting today. So I'll pause there for a moment. I'm going to go into a couple of I think really two more slides that sort of pack a punch, and then we can go through the rest. And I think in dialogue. Does that make sense, Andy? Does that work? Okay. All right. Very good. So two, big pieces, big parts of that 4.09%. First, contractual increases from for existing staff, right? So if all we did was keep the people that we have today, that would be sort of an automatic increase of 3.17% for that line item, which is an overall impact of 1.91% on the overall budget, on the overall Board of Education budget. We can see how it lays out there by school. We could certainly, combine teachers together and see that overall, but I think that the story is the same. It's essentially a $10,602,288.62 for 21-22, which is a total increase of $326,088.62. On the following slide, we see the restorations and new positions that we would seek for this year's budget. So first, as we look at the Samuel Staples and Helen Keller, we see the addition of a fourth grade teacher based on some enrollment projections that we believe really warrant at that level, so that we can add the fifth teacher to the fourth grade group, and that we have those 5 sections to make sure that we maintain reasonable level of student to teachers in each classroom. The restoration, as I mentioned before, of the media specialist at $72,000. The addition of 0.5 social worker. So we have a social worker who is currently 0.5. The idea would be that we add the other 0.5 to bring the social worker in. That would be an addition at Helen Keller. Restoration of the extracurricular stipends, which were cut last year. Last year as we faced COVID, I think there was a fairly safe bet that we weren't going to have a lot of extracurriculars. And that was a sort of a way to get to where we need to be. But we feel very strongly that the social, emotional, and sort of the opportunity for the kids to get together is largely supported by that, the extracurriculars. And then finally, the restoration of a PE professional that we recently cut, that helps make sure that the kids can spend their time in PE, actually doing PE, instead of standing around waiting for everybody to change and all that stuff. And then finally, and so that is $260,000 for Samuel Staples and Helen Keller, with a total budget overall impact of 1.53%. And then finally, the Director of Digital Learning, which is a new position that we imagine in central office, who will focus on the sort of the component of bringing together all of the different pieces of education that touch technology, which is immense. This is not to say we want to plunk kids down in front of screens for 7 hours a day and then put them back on the bus and send them home. That is absolutely not it. It is as much as anything about knowing the appropriate and effective use of that screen time, of technology, and understanding the balance and making sure that we can make smarter decisions about the way that we're sort of building the curriculum around, and certainly establishing a foothold when it comes to making sure we have future ready learners. So that is that part of that. Now, that is only an overall budget increase of $32,107 because we had previously budgeted for a data analyst position, which, as we got approval for that and we were coming into COVID land, we lost our superintendent and we lost our director of finance. And we're in the process of sort of rehiring. It just didn't happen this year that we actually hired that data analyst. So it was budgeted for previously. The intent would be that we don't actually fill that role this year. Instead, we hire a director of digital learning that would take on a sort of even broader and sort of more important role as an educational leader in central office.
John,
Okay. Yes,
John,
please.
Yeah, we said we'd have questions later, but
No, this is great. This is where I was going to pause.
yeah, there may be a couple of questions that relate
Sure.
specifically to the slides.
Yes.
It'd be easier to deal with those
Yeah.
while the slides are up, rather than have you-
Absolutely. I'll just characterize. I won't go through any of the other slides. I'll just tell you the rest of the slides are essentially the presentation, or the spreadsheet that you all received most recently, that sort of summarized against all the various codes. I think it was about 4 pages printed, and that was really, I think, the best version of all of that sort of data exported. Quick caveat, and I suspect we're going to be talking about this more in a few minutes. We've gone through and had to, because the old Phoenix financial and accounting system, it just doesn't work anymore. There's no way to get that system to do what we needed to do. It was sunset last year. And because of that, we needed to transition to a new finance and accounting system. And that's been painful. That process of moving from system A to system B, making sure it's mapping, making sure that the reports come out of it properly, has been extraordinarily painful. So I hope people understand this is, if there have been any issues with people getting transparency about what the numbers are, it is not because we're trying to hide anything. We want to put it all out there into the public. It is simply a function of it's not as easy as it used to be to get that out yet. And we're working to fix that as quickly as possible.
Okay. Obviously, as part of that transition, some stuff is reclassified and it makes it very complicated
difficult
to follow. I'm sure it is for your board, the same as ours.
Infuriating.
A couple things I wanted to get clarified. If you can go
Sure.
back one slide to the
Absolutely.
contract.
Yes.
On that was based totally on the existing staff.
Correct.
That does not assume that anyone's going to leave.
Correct.
Okay, because, and we did have this discussion earlier, there is always some turnover. If you've got 80 teachers and they average 40 years in their career,
Yep.
On average 2 are going to leave every year. And typically the ones who leave are your highest paid, and people come in at a lower level. So you haven't made any projection that of what that might be.
No, and I will. I want to open the door if we can to Rydell and Clarence. Feel free to jump in as well if you have anything to add on that or any color to give on that. No, this did not include any assumptions of sort of departures.
So
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Rydell Harrison, Superintendent. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share tonight. So at this time, we do not have any teachers at Samuel Staples or at Helen Keller who have acknowledged that they are retiring at the end of this current school year. Surely, if that does come up, we will make adjustments to the budget in anticipation of that next year. But that is something that we're looking at, because we know that could result in potential savings going forward.
Has anyone suggested you go back and take a look at what the history has been? Have we averaged 2 leaving a year or 7 leaving a year, or is it 1 this year and 12 next year and then 3 the year after kind of pattern? Or is there any fairly narrow band that's typical? Because that allows you to make assumptions, at least reasonable assumptions, because obviously in a budget this size and as complex as this, there are a lot of assumptions that have to be made, and there are a lot of things that some things are going to come out better than expected and some are going to come out worse than expected. But having the history would be helpful, because obviously if you have 100 staff now, someday all 100 of those people are going to leave over time, not all at the same time. And it may take 30 years for the last one to leave, or 40 years for the last one to leave, but there will always be some turnover. And I've been going through these budgets for a long time, and I have routinely had the challenge of really guessing what's a reasonable number to assume for that. Because right now we don't have the data to be able to make any kind of judgment on that.
I think it's a very good point, Andy. I don't think that Vicky's on. She's the genius when it comes to all things, sort of having that at her fingertips and knowing, hey, here's the rate at which we usually see that. So we will need to get back to you on that, but I think we can give you some idea of what the general run rate is of sort of retirements.
And Andy, just to that point, as part of this budget process, I did have some of those conversations with Vicky of what do we typically see. I think with a relatively small number of teachers, it's really hard to really to get that pattern because it's a little bit different every year. One of the conversations that we did talk about was the number of teachers that would be eligible. So we had this conversation sort of leading up to the budget, but also had this conversation when we were negotiating the teacher contract, just to get a sense of where teachers sort of mapped out on the pay ladder. And I've worked in districts where there was a high concentration of teachers really at the top part of the pay scale. In Easton, there is a little bit more spread across the ladder. And so that is something that we could come back with some additional information. But I can tell you that in thinking about this and anticipating what that could look like, I don't anticipate us seeing a significant number of teachers retiring at the end of the year.
Yeah, and it's not just retiring. I mean, there are people who leave for other reasons. A spouse
That's right.
gets transferred to Cleveland and they decide to follow the spouse. And that would have a different impact because that could be somebody who's at the very lowest end of the scale. So
Right.
any historical data that gives any indication of that is useful for political purposes. Did anybody else on the Board of Finance have any questions on that slide? But there'll be plenty of time for other questions as we go. If not, if you want to go to the next one, the new and restored positions, do the total amounts in there, are those salary figures or are those total cost, including health insurance and any other fringe benefits?
Clarence, would you mind?
Those are salary figures, but the fringe benefits are in the budget, but those are salary figures.
Okay, but if we do hire, the first one is hire a fourth grade teacher at 75,000, that the amount that's in your budget though is more than 75. It's going to include all
Yes.
of the other fringe benefits.
Yes, we have to make an assumption on the fringe benefits. We don't know if they're going to take insurance or they're going to have a single payer, two person or a family. So we take a weighted average around 15,000 for every new employee. And that's the budget salary is an assumed number. It could be lower, but that's sort of for budgeting purposes, that's the number based on the salary scale.
And just for everyone's benefit, the next slide is benefits. This would be a sort of all baked in assumption with sort of these new and restored roles in as well. But we can also provide a sort of another cut of this that would be salary plus benefits and sort of various assumptions on that.
One thing I'll point out, the social worker wouldn't require any benefits because they're already in, their benefits are already there. So it'd only be the other positions. To be the fourth grade teacher and the media specialist and the para, because the extracurricular stipends don't have benefits, and the social worker already has benefits. So it'd only be for those three positions.
Also, I think the math that we did on the salary for the director of digital learning was all in, was not just salary.
That's
right.
That's correct. Yep.
That's right. So it's really just for the fourth grade teacher and the media specialist.
One of the things we did on the town side several years ago is, of course, the fringe benefits were in a separate budget for fringe benefits. So the individual departments would see, okay, I have $100,000 in salaries and I have this much in operating expenses. And they'd say, well, yeah, but my budget is only this big and my increase is only 1%. What's the problem? And how come the overall budget has gone up 5% for the town? So what we started doing is putting in the what we started doing is putting in the fringe benefits on their reports that they received, and the general reaction was that they were stunned. they had no idea that it was that expensive for fringe benefits. So that's
Yeah.
useful for kind of all levels of management to see that visible.
Yeah, here.
How about the contractual increases of 1.91%? Did that include benefits?
No, 'cause we're
So the 1 point, overall.
No, that's all just salary. Since we're self-insured, the board makes a determination what they're gonna budget for insurance purposes based on claims history. As a self-insured, we have some discretion as to how much we actually budget for our insurance costs.
Okay, so there's no associated increase.
Not reflected in the budget, because once again, like I said, as a
All right.
self-insured party, the board decides how much they're gonna budget based on the claims history and recommendations from our insurance consultant.
And no increase for TRB?
Nope.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions on those two slides?
Yes, could we hang on this one for a minute? John,
Absolutely.
could you go over a little bit more about what the Director of Digital Learning will be doing, and how did that evolve from, evolve from another position, I guess?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it actually evolved from the other position. I would say, and I'm definitely, I think Dr. Harrison's like, me please. I'm definitely going to let Dr. Harrison talk about it in a moment, but I have the history on the data analyst, I think, more than Dr. Harrison. The data analyst was, a role that we envisioned, come in and help us to understand the crazy amount of data that we get on tests, on, grades, on enrollment, on all of these things. It was envisioned as a sort of a mid-level role for someone who would work with all kinds of different people in central office and our building leaders, et cetera. We didn't end up hiring that person. And when Dr. Harrison came in and Clarence came in, they had a different vision based on their experience working in other districts. And that vision included this sort of new role that we frankly hadn't talked about the previous year, but had been on sort of the lips of educators for several years. And when we started talking about it, there were many people in Region 9 and in Reading who said, oh, we've talked about that role for a while. Are we finally ready to really do something serious about that? And as we went into the conversations, I think, Dr. Harrison made a very compelling argument for the value, as well as Dr. Pearson-Ugal in the curriculum space for, the value of having not just Dr. Harrison and Dr. Pearson-Ugal in the central office as educational leaders, but having a third educational leader who's bringing their expertise in using technology and the sort of the digital aspects of education as a true educator into this space. This is not tech support. This is not, somebody who is going to run your Excel spreadsheets for you. This is someone who's going to have a profound understanding of how technology and education connect with one another. So Dr. Harrison, I'll let you give a little bit more color.
Thanks, John, you did a good job really kind of capturing the big pieces of that. When I look at education over the last probably 20 years, one of the biggest investments that we've made outside of special education is around technology. And when you invest in devices, which we have done, which we continue to do, we've seen a huge investment and focus of time and energy and money on devices and technology. When you do that without having the leadership in place to really guide that work forward, it is very easy to just have a collection of devices without a really clear plan going forward. When I came in and started to assess the needs of our district, listen to the community, listen to our teachers, it became really clear that this was a need. I will say that our teams of teachers, our administrators have done a really good job cataloging all of the devices, making sure that our infrastructure for networking is robust. But I felt like it was really important for us to have a clear vision going forward. When you start to put the leadership in place to really guide this technology-focused work, you really get a payout on the back end because you end up saving yourself money with making really smart strategic choices. You end up really laying out a plan that aligns with the curriculum and instruction work, that aligns with our instructional focus, and that really moves our students towards that, that aspirational goal of being future ready in a really purposeful way. And so, as John mentioned, the timing was really good for this position in that we had this data analyst plug area. When I looked at what our overall needs were, I felt like this was a much stronger need. Then there's the compelling case coming, working through COVID and coming out of COVID. And so if you would have asked me 13 months ago, not 12 months ago, did I think that we could really, in education, not just in our schools, but in general, run schools remotely in any effective way, I would have said absolutely not. And that is just because, as a general rule, we didn't have the skill set needed in education to do that work. So you see how far we've come. And it's really important, I think, if we are using this pandemic as an opportunity to leverage some new learning that we've done along the way about what works best for students and how to think about students learning and teaching differently. It is definitely in the space of technology. And I think that this is a smart investment for us, not just for this current upcoming school year, but really to take us into the future. We also recognize that we're not reinventing the wheel or making something up new, that this is a pretty standard position in many districts that's the size of our tri-district and many districts that have the expected outcomes that we have for our students as well. And so it just really became necessary for us to move this forward.
Go ahead.
Let me make it another not a question, but this year I unfortunately didn't get to be on any, see any of your live Zoom meetings. So I've spent the last few days and a number of delightful hours looking at the recordings. And I got to say, I'm just impressed with the way you folks have gone about analyzing your budget and discussing it and looking at alternatives and doing, I think, virtually everything that someone would expect you to do, when you're developing budget. So I just want to say that. And then on the question of what is the effect of the pandemic that we're sort of still in, I guess. I know you've talked about a lot of that. You've talked about what some of the expenses and all that, but is there a general feeling as to sort of how our schools and students have managed that to learn in this environment? So I'm not asking for a long, you could talk about that forever, I guess, but I'm just wondering what are the discussions about that been like?
So I'll be happy to talk about that. When I think about, so when I compare to what I expected our outcomes to be, I expected, given what I shared, what I thought about what distance learning or remote learning could potentially look like 13 months ago, I expected that our students would be significantly behind where we wanted them to be. I had lots of faith in our educators and our teachers and our administrators. Did not have lots of faith in thinking that the mitigation strategies that we would put in place would be effective enough to keep our students and our staff safe, and really worried that there would be much less contact time of face-to-face learning. So given what my expectations are, I am pleasantly, very, very pleased with where we are. I want to be really clear in saying that it doesn't mean that we don't have some ground to make up. I think that we are already working with our teachers and administrators to think about restructuring the way that we approach education, or that we approach teaching and learning, that it's much more from an acceleration standpoint, Paul, rather than thinking about how do we fill all of these holes that students have, that we are being really creative with how we use time. And so this is where the technology piece again gets to come into play, particularly with some of our older students, that if we think of learning not just happening while students are in the four walls of the building, but that we think of learning happening anytime, that's a real key component. I will say the biggest area of focus for us, in addition to thinking about the academic gains that we want students to make, is really the social and emotional impact on our students, and how that has impacted them over time, and what we can expect going forward. So again, there's been a significant trend in education of the need for focused social and emotional mental health support for our students. We see that at the elementary level, middle level, all the way through high school. It's not unique to Easton or Reading or Region 9. It is very much true across our country. And I think that naturally you can expect that, that this pandemic has exacerbated that. So while we've already seen some of those needs growing, part of what you see here with the additional increase of 0.5 of a social worker is really to position ourselves to be responsive to what our students' needs are next year, but then thinking long-term that that those are just that the base level of supports that we need in place for our students and their mental health support is what we're trying to achieve now, so that we're not always in the just response mode, but we're able to really put that support in place proactively.
Right now, somewhat when in your comments earlier about working to mitigate the damage from the inability for kids to be in the classroom in person. Obviously, Easton and Reading have come back into direct participation much quicker than many areas of the country, and I think that's something that you and your staff should be proud of, and I think everyone in the community is thankful for. When you look at a situation like Los Angeles and think of how much damage is being done to students in a district like that, it's just unconscionable that it could get to that point. On the digital learning position, you indicated that this is something that you're not doing from scratch, that you're basically looking to emulate what's been done in some other districts. Can you give us some examples of some other districts that have put that position in place and what the impact has been? Obviously not tonight, but
I'd be happy to do that. That was a part of the presentation that I made to the tri-board, just looking at the presence of which DIRG A districts and DIRG B districts had a director of technology or a director of digital learning. I can say for DIRG A, it was all of them. For DIRG B, it was most of them. But I could also talk specifically about what I've seen in districts that I've worked in, both in Connecticut and also prior to coming to Connecticut in North Carolina, and how that has really impacted students and their outcomes over time.
I'm not as concerned about which districts have somebody with a title, but what they've done.
Absolutely.
And how it's impacted students and learning. Because I'm sure you know better than I do, there are plenty of districts that have lots of people with lots of titles that don't help Johnny learn how to read.
Yep.
Hey, Andy. Is it okay if I ask a question?
Yes.
Surprise. I think you guys have done a really good job with this budget this year. And if you could go back where you kind of summarized all the expenses. I don't know what slide it was on. Oh yeah, right there. So that's, if we look at that and, okay, so the initially, okay, proposed budget was $18 million. And included in that was a roof repair of how much?
Yeah, and it was actually it wasn't like a full roof repair. This was just sort of a series of roof repairs and sort of minor sort of repairs that would be done, and we felt that it was safe to take 10,000 out of that. So there's still some money for that, just sort of general roof repairs at Keller.
I got it.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. No, but I really like how you looked at kind of what your needs are for the year, and I do agree that the students have suffered for the last year by doing this remote learning as much as they did. But yeah, I'm going to study this a little bit more, and obviously I'll probably have some additional questions. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Other questions on these slides from any of the board members? Now, did you want to go through the other slides, John?
So maybe what I'll do is because this is the rest of the slides. So these were summaries that we thought helped bring sort of meaning to a lot of the stuff that was in, some of the other materials. What you'll find with each one of these sort of remaining slides is they're essentially the Easton Board of Ed 2020-2021 proposed budget with variance as of March 9th, 21. That spreadsheet that you all received, that it was the first spreadsheet that I said, this actually makes sense. So that is really the content inside of each one of the remaining slides. So you'll find conference and travel, tuition, transportation. You'll find each one of these sort of different pieces, and you'll see the sort of increases or decreases across each one of those lines. But it is the rest of these slides are exactly what you find in that spreadsheet. So I'm sure you've all already reviewed them. I'm happy to take any questions on anything that people had sort of going into tonight. The one thing, and I think you made the point earlier, Andy, you see some of these items and you'll see an increase, for instance, in the special education space, and I can go back and find that. But in the special education space, you might see a reduction of 300,000 and then an addition of speech services of 200,000 or 206,000, I think it is. And these services of 255,000. It's like, wait a second, what's that? That is the moving to the new financial and accounting system and sort of mapping those things to the new category codes and all that. So it can be difficult to understand. So I absolutely understand if somebody says, wait a second, what's going on with special education going down and then going back up in this? And I want to make sure that people have the opportunity to ask those questions as well. The one other thing that'll be, that is in here, just to provide a little bit of context, I wasn't sure if people wanted to dive into this, but we do have a few slides in the appendix, which summarize the enrollment projections. Understanding this, it's important to understand we have sort of two sources. We have an MMI, which is a new source that we're getting projections from. We have Prouda, who we've used forever. We adjusted this to foot to the MMI projections for enrollment because the Prouda for kindergarten had a number that just seems totally unrealistic in terms of the number of students, and our sort of building leaders said there's just no chance. Yes, we have a really healthy group of kindergarten slated to come in, but it's very unlikely that we see anything close to that. So just sort of a note on that these numbers match the MMI that we sent over previously. And then this is the sort of summary of that.
Can you go back?
I'm sorry. Yeah, of course. Sorry, Ira.
No, I think the lower left 299 doesn't add up to the projected enrollment. I think you maybe updated the main numbers, but not the numbers on the left.
You're 100% right, Ira. That is exactly right. I didn't make a note to myself to update those numbers, and you're right. So I will fix those. Thank you.
And just so that you know, just for the context of this conversation and looking at the slide, for Keller, it is 307. So I know that number is higher.
Thank you. 293,079. That's what you said? Okay, thank you. All right, and I'll get this number fixed as well.
532.
Thank you.
Yeah, these are significantly different than the spreadsheet that had been sent to us.
So there should have been an updated set, the MMI numbers, and that's the issue. The Prouda numbers versus the MMI numbers were different, and I think there was a projection of 108 for kindergarten, and it's just, you know, there's no version of reality where we see that happening.
Yeah, and there are significant differences elsewhere too. Here you've got, well, second grade 81 versus 85, and
Here, I think I actually have. So here's the sort of side by side, right? 108 versus 96, 85 versus 87, 82 versus 81, 86, 86, yay. 96 versus 97, 83 versus 85, 95 versus 98, 100 versus 102, and 104 versus 107. So it's relatively close, you know, 2-3 students up, 2-3 students down. And then the K8, or the sort of kindergarten number being the one that's sort of most, sort of off in terms of where we think it's going to be. And I don't know if Clarence, Clarence actually worked sort of with MMI to sort of work on these projections. I don't know if you want to talk briefly about the methodology that MMI uses and why we think that's a very solid.
So first of all, Dr. Prouda bases his projections solely on birth rates, where MMI takes an approach of birth rates, housing stock movements, planned developments. If you guys, I don't recall sending the MMI report over, but if you don't have, we can send it to you. It's a very detailed analysis of, I know someone had asked for, but I don't know if I sent it. I don't know if you got it or not.
Okay.
But the MMI takes into account migration in and out of town, birth rates, planned development. So more of a more holistic, full look versus just how many kids were born 5 years ago and moving those cohorts up through the 12th grade.
The other piece, Clarence, that I would add to that, just that I appreciate about the MMI, and really, it's just really good to have two data points for a comparison. I think that helps us to plan more effectively. But the other piece that I appreciated about MMI is that they actually took into account the impact of COVID and really tried to anticipate what some of those what that impact would look like in our districts, and also looking sort of more globally at Fairfield County and trends across the state. And I think that that's really helpful to give us a clear picture. It also really helps from a planning standpoint over time. They have something called their persistence ratio, which really looks at do we increase in the number of students per cohort as time goes on. And I think that ratio helps us to look into the future to see, yes, we're making a decision about what our needs are for this upcoming school year. So that's where we talk about the need for that 4th grade teacher. But we can anticipate that will be a need that will persist based on that trend data looking forward. So again, I appreciate going through the budgeting process on an annual basis. But I really like to think for multiple years out to the greatest extent possible, so that our decisions that we're making today, we could stand by them 3-4 years down the road, and it becomes predictable what the expectations are to the taxpayers. And I think that that's part of our responsibility.
One of the things that kind of jumps out on that, though, is unless things have changed, always the general rule that I've heard and makes perfect sense is that from a class size standpoint, it's more important to have the smaller class size in the youngest grades, and you can get by with a little bit larger class sizes in the upper grades. And both of these projections have smaller class size in the 5th grade than in kindergarten. And that to me, I'm mystified by that. And it leads to the question of, is the fifth section in the fifth grade justified? And should there be a sixth section in kindergarten instead? What's the rationale here?
I think, and I'll, obviously Dr. Harrison, feel free to jump in, but I think even when we look at, so looking at the MMI, which we think are more realistic, even when we look at that number of 96, our building leaders who, yes, absolutely love the science behind MMI and proud of, but especially when it comes to kindergarten, that is a very difficult number to forecast. And our building leaders believe that even 96 is high, that we will end up in a number that is sort of reasonable in terms of what we have previously socialized in terms of what a good kindergarten class size is. I think we're against a difficult break point with the numbers where, sort of moving that sort of 5 sections to 4 with the sort of 5th grade creates a very challenging sort of class size for the 5th grade classes. And we're just sort of in between that spot where you start to get to, sort of 22, 23 folks per class.
The one thing I would add to that also is when you think about the range of needs academically of students, which is really one of the reasons why we talk most about class size. So, I often hear people say, well, particularly adults will say, well, when I was in elementary school, like, this was my class size. And I say the same thing. And part of that was because years ago, we weren't as nuanced in thinking about how to meet the individual needs of the students and where they were academically. So it was a lot easier to sort of teach to the middle and, everybody else sort of get it. And now we are a lot more focused in thinking about how to meet those specific needs in the class. When you're thinking about younger students, the range of needs are a little bit narrower. As you're thinking about older students, those needs could get a little bit wider. When you factor COVID in as well, there's the potential for there to be some additional needs. So I of course have a lot of respect for Ms. Fox-Santora, and I know that she and her team have thought through this and really given a lot of thought to what are the potential needs that we have with that cohort of students. The other piece that plays into this when we think about how our historical data is really informing our current decisions, it has been a trend that we have students moving in mid-year during those upper grades in 4th and 5th grade as families are preparing to get students started in a new district in 6th grade, right, leading into middle school. So they have seen at Samuel Staples for the last 13 years, more students moving in mid-year before that 5th grade. So you want to leave before 6th grade. So you do want to leave a little bit of space in anticipation of that. So that definitely went into a lot of the decision-making around where to put that 5th section.
Another issue that came up, and obviously it jumped out with the Prouder projections. Over the years, several of your predecessors right now have made the point that in terms of administrative staff, that the general recommendation was that an assistant principal was justified in a middle school when the enrollment was above 300. The projection from Prouder was that Keller would be at 299, which, okay, right on the boundary. But if you look at the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades, by the time they've all moved into Keller, now you're down in the 260 to 265 range for students. Has the board or the administration really looked at that to see if it's really justified to have 2 principals and 2 assistant principals? Because I know there's been discussion in the past about the 2 schools sharing an assistant principal. Haven't heard that in a couple of years, but it has been discussed before.
So we actually dug in on that topic last year, and we had we dug in during the budget conversations last year, and had a fairly robust conversation about what it means in today's world to have 2 senior educational leaders at the school. And especially, from perspective of safety, from perspective of ensuring the social emotional health of the students, that there was less of a sort of tie to that sort of 300 number, and more when we think about having 3 grades of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, the need to make sure that if one educational leader is outside of the building for a meeting, that there is always somebody there. We hate to invoke, some of the terrible tragedies that have occurred in our state, but this is a part of that, and understanding that whether it's an extreme crisis like that, or it's even less severe, but still very impactful crises, sort of having multiple educational leaders at the institution is a very important part of the sort of today's expectations in any middle school. Rydell, I don't know if you had anything you'd want to add to that.
Sure. So I am a former middle school principal and spent a lot of years in middle school buildings, from a building with 850 students to down to 550 students. I really don't think that there is a hard and fast number. I think that we use these numbers to kind of inform the discussion, but I think it really is driven by 2 things, really. What are the needs in the building and the needs of the students? And then secondly, what are the responsibilities that administrators have? And it could be a little bit different from school to school and from district to district. Surely, when we're thinking about how to be really responsible with the financial resources that are entrusted to us by the town, we want to make smart decisions. I would want to spend some time to really look at what the needs are, and then, to your point, Andy, to really look forward over time to see, is there a need to make changes? And then if so, what does it look like to transition? But really making sure that we are making a really informed decision based on what the needs are in the building. When we think about next year and some of the challenges sort of post-COVID, I'm not sure that next year would be the right time to make that change if we're just on the cusp. If we're talking about, whether or not 1 or 2 students show up, if we're thinking about 300 as that magic number, I think it would be something that I would want to just dig a little bit, take a little bit more time and dig into to make a recommendation.
Okay. Other board members have any questions for John or Rydell or Clarence? Everybody's awfully quiet this year. They're usually more.
I hope we're answering everyone's questions.
Yeah.
We're learning how to listen.
I do have one question. Do you want to go? Wendy, do you want to go?
I got nothing, go.
All right. We always come back to this, or I come back to this every year. How many students are actually riding the bus this year?
It's a good question, Michael.
It varies. It varies because
this year especially.
Yeah, this year's it's just crazy. Like if a parent, parents now have the option to be in what we call cohort C, which means they're remote. So a parent could decide on Monday, my child's riding the bus, but on Wednesday, they're cohort C, so they're not riding the bus. And they have that free discretion. So I can try to get you some data on average ridership, but it won't really tell you anything because it all sort of depended on the individual discretion of the parents and how they feel about their children being on the bus at any
Yeah.
particular week.
Yeah,
So-
and this,
You should see the line at Keller
Yeah.
in the afternoon.
So,
I've seen police officers out there, so.
so I've seen the traffic jam, okay, of cars, and I've watched the buses go by.
Hmm.
Okay, and correct me if I'm wrong, Clarence, less than 5 kids per bus.
I wouldn't dispute that. The problem you have is we have a legal obligation and ethical. and
Oh,
moral
I've heard that. I've heard that. Here's my suggestion, right? The state has made a lot of exceptions. Is it possible that our elected officials in town can contact our state senator and our state representative to get a waiver on that 1 seat per child, that's necessary on the bus? Because if we could do that and get the parents to opt out of the bus, we could save a lot of money.
and you mean for the rest of this school year?
The rest of this school year and next year. I mean, because every year parents are becoming more tentative about putting their children on the bus. And obviously this year.
Yeah,
but-
especially this year.
Yeah, especially this year. But, each student is about $1,000 for the bus for the year.
Yeah, so I think this year definitely, and I know you're not suggesting this, using this year as a model, this breaks all the models. And if there was ever a year to, look for that kind of waiver or some kind of exception or some kind of flexibility, and it would have been this year to do it. And I think it may be that it's too late to do that at this point for this year. In terms of sort of having conversations about what that means and sort of what our ridership is in a sort of normal year and looking at projections, I think we can take that away and sort of do some homework on that. I think, obviously we are obligated by law to do X, Y, and Z. If there is something that is fair for our students and our families and right by them, while also, sort of giving us some options that makes financial sense, like we should absolutely explore that. So,
Did we adjust the bus sizes according when we got the new contract?
for this year, you mean?
I mean,
Or do you
it doesn't seem like those gigantic buses are around as much.
Yeah, one of the things that was discussed in past years, John, and the answer was, we've already got the buses, there's no choice, but routes where it's perpetually 75% empty buses, why have a 72 passenger bus and not say a 36 passenger bus, which would be a lot cheaper to operate as well as to acquire. And I think Wendy's point is, have we made any progress on that?
So we can dive in on that. And I suspect we have not looked at that. Clarence, is that accurate?
I was unaware that was a request or a position, given my being a neophyte here to the district. So that's news to me. That was a request that was made.
Right. So we could actually open up a whole work stream of, sort of evaluating our busing situation. It's a very difficult year to do that, to rely on this year's data and even most of last year's data to inform that decision. So I think we'd have to be looking back a couple of years and understanding that. And then it's also, how do we understand the sort of current behaviors and how that shifts into next year? Are people saying, you know what, I'm good. Like we're all, we've all got our vaccines and kids are on the bus and we're back to normal in September? Or are people still saying, the kids aren't vaccinated yet, and therefore I'm going to drive my kid, or the kid's going to, ride their bike, or, whatever the other options are. And, given that on any day, at least under the current sort of law and our ability to sort of meet that law, any parent can say, hey, I want my kid to be riding the bus. And there is some leeway that we have. Is it 2 weeks? Clarence, I don't know if you have that at your fingertips, but I think they have to give us at least some warning that, hey, I'm going to start putting my kid on the bus, but we're obligated to serve that.
And not only serve our students, we're obligated to serve any students that live in town that attend any private schools in town. So you've got, for Easton Country Day example, we have to provide transportation to anyone who lives in Easton who attends Easton Country Day.
So I will say just a word about this. as many of you know, I spent the majority of my administrative career in North Carolina. This was a flexibility that was afforded to districts in North Carolina where you could have parents either opt out of transportation, or if a student didn't ride for a number of consecutive days, you could essentially drop them from the route. And it was a way to really save money. So when I first came to Connecticut as a superintendent, I was so excited to bring this new idea because I was going to immediately save the district money. And I hit wall after wall after wall. And every conversation that I've been in with anyone who has a little bit of a title at the state level, I've brought this up again. And I know that there are a number of superintendents that I'm in constant contact with, that we've all continued to really push this forward. It's been particularly impactful this year. As you can imagine, we encouraged our parents to drive students at the start of the school year, given the potential for transmission spread. But going forward, it is really something that I'd be very interested to explore. But we talk about things sort of theoretically taking an act of Congress. This would be would have to be the result of change in law. From what I can understand, doing some digging around the edges on this topic in Easton and what we've done so far, I understand that one of our board members has been sort of a transportation guru and really working through some of that work with Jeff and things that he's done with bus routes and the bus company. So I think that there are some opportunities for continued conversation. I do want to just sort of hedge and be able to say, do I expect that we would see anything significant to change going forward? I don't foresee that happening in the very near future, but just know as your superintendent on things that I'm advocating for, this is one of them.
And you know, the things that need an act of Congress or at least the Connecticut legislature to act, that's not scary to me. Like, let's go talk to them. Let's go have reasonable conversations. We have found them to be very reasonable and responsive to our needs. So, you know, like, we're open to having those conversations, and obviously we're going to make sure we're doing the right thing for the kids and, you know, doing what is fair. But
here, this is my point. Nothing gets done overnight.
Yeah.
But it's very possible to get it going, because I noticed that there's not a $40,000 sidewalk job in there anymore. So that's a positive. That's a big positive.
Yeah. And Michael, I think your point is really well made there. Nothing happens overnight. Like, you got to lay the groundwork, and even just understanding the legislative cycle. Like, this was actually the year to start introducing that, and we, kind of missed that cycle. So now they're on these 2-year legislative cycles. We're going to have a little bit of a different mix of sort of the topics that are going to be introduced this next year. It's not impossible, but the next cycle, like, it's going to be harder to get into that than it would have been to get into this cycle. So, planning ahead and understanding that we want to do that. Hey, maybe it takes us 4 years to get, but I'm not saying it's going to take 4 years to make a difference here, but if it did, great. When that starts is right now. So yeah, let's start having some of those conversations and get smarter about it and see what our options are.
Aside from the legislative issue, one of the constraints that you typically have, which doesn't have any impact from the number of students riding the buses, but the length of the bus run. If we get agreement for 12 kids to say they're not going to take the bus, but you still have to get to
1 hour
at the other end of town, it can still be a lengthy bus ride. One factor, though, that really hasn't been pursued in reducing the time that it takes for the bus ride is the number of stops the bus has to make and the time it takes for stopping for each child or each household. That's not something that's terribly popular with parents, but I know there are other districts where kids are grouped at bus stops, so that instead of 8 stops to 8 houses, there's 1 stop with 8 kids. And
Yep.
that can,
I thought they started doing that more.
We
Yeah, we
did.
don't have door-to-door service. We have bus stops, and I get plenty of parents chewing my ear off about it, but we don't do door-to-door service. Now, there
Yep.
are other districts near us that do that, and it's if you ever get caught behind one of those buses, it can be painful. They literally go, I watched the bus stop and move forward 5 feet and stop again once in a neighboring Durgay district, and I was totally dumbfounded by it.
Yeah,
You should've-
we did make a shift 2 years ago where we had some bus stops, and it's in a town like ours, 3-acre zoning in some parts and much larger properties in others. Certainly it's not. There are some places where you're going to pick up here and drive half a mile down the road and pick up again, and that was 2 different houses. But certainly in Lower Easton, my kids get on at a bus stop, and so does everyone else down here.
okay. Other questions from board members? I have one thing I want to make sure I'm clear on. Clarence, you got us a spreadsheet with grants that go to the Board of Ed. Is this all of the outside funding? For example, did you get any money from the CARES Act or any other sources like that?
We got money for this fiscal year for COVID. That money has been expended already, and we paid for it and then reimbursed ourselves. So there's nothing for next year. So everything we have that's been booked and confirmed is what's represented in that report. Now, there are some new grant opportunities coming up. I just got notification today about potential security grant, but until it's been awarded, we didn't deem it appropriate to put it down until it's been awarded.
Okay, so, but the money that you did get this year doesn't show up on that spreadsheet then?
No, because it's for what's showing up that's for next year.
Well, no, you've got a spreadsheet that you gave us a spreadsheet that has the 2021-22 budget, which you don't know yet, but you've also got the 2020-21, the current year. You have.
If they left it off, sir, my apologies. I can go update because I think they took the model from last year and was presented to you and added this year's, and they probably forgot to add the COVID. It was $87,000 and change for Easton that we got for COVID, and we expended that back in the fall, and we got reimbursed. Now this is March, back in January.
Okay, because one of the things that we had asked for from all of the departments was a summary of the financial impact of COVID.
We have a report that we can give you that shows the details of what we spent and assigned to COVID and what our reimbursement was, so I can provide that to you.
Yeah, 'cause what our purpose was to see who got put into a bind. For example, the senior center stayed open and they spent a ton of money on wipes and cleaning supplies and handing out. They probably had lots of glove expenses. And then we had other departments that really weren't affected at all. But what we wanted to do is, if a department had to use a lot of money for that purpose, we didn't want it to not be visible in the current year and result in faulty judgment on what their needs were going to be the following year. Because we try to look at what the current year expenditures are to get a feel for areas where maybe we might have had a little too much contingency in some budgets. If we see a department, the library, that has a line item for $5,000 year after year, and we see the actual is typically $800, we dig into that. And by the same token, we don't want to find out that because Park and Rec couldn't run any of their programs, they saved a lot of money this year, therefore we can easily cut their budget. It's a two-way street, and it's strictly a case of making sure that we know where we really stand.
Good.
Somewhat in that vein, obviously, everybody knows that the latest stimulus package has been signed. Connecticut Post the other day before it was even signed, had said how much money Easton was going to get. And I'm sure there are people in town who now say, wow, the town is going to get $2 million and the Board of Ed is going to get 430 something thousand. Let's figure out how we're going to spend it. The obviously the absolute caution would be,
Yes,
until the check comes in,
that's right.
and all the rules are in, don't even think about it.
100% right. Totally agree with you, Andy. I think that it oftentimes comes with strings attached, specific rules about how you can use it. This is, must supplement, not supplant, like all of those rules. And I'm not taking anybody's word for it until, checks in hand.
Yeah. The town of Reading some years ago counted on $900,000 in tax revenue from redevelopment of the old Gilbert and Bennett wire mill into a mixed use property, which is still not done.
Yeah.
And that put a huge hole in their budget. And if, the worst thing we could do is think that the money's going to be available to buy pencils, and it turns out you can only buy pens.
That's right. Well, and it can also create a cliff a couple of years down the road. You book that money in, and then you count on that money in future years. Oh, great! Now we need a 15% increase. Like, no. Like if we get access to some of those funds, it would be, how do you use them in a way that really makes sense and is long-term sort of fiscally responsible?
Yeah, and obviously, if there's a way to do it, a really great way to use that money would be to help kids recover from the setbacks they've had from the remote learning.
That's right.
Even if it's something like keep the buildings open in the afternoon and hire teachers as independent contractors to act as tutors. That's not something that builds in a long-term requirement, but
right. And just for the sake of our teachers associations, it would be using the sort of agreed upon stipend rates. We get into trouble with the independent contractor stuff, but same effect in the end.
Right.
Yeah.
Anybody from the Board of Finance, any other questions? All right. If not, then we'll open it up for members of the public to ask questions or make comments. The one rule of this is that the discussion tonight is about the Board of Education's budget and only budgetary matters. If someone wants to bring up other issues like curriculum, that's not germane to this. And I would ask Christine to not hesitate for a second to use the mute button if somebody starts to get far afield and jumping in with things that are not budget related. If you're, obviously there's been a lot of conversation around town about some curriculum issues lately, and sorry, John, but we have to say to people, if you've got concerns about that, take it to the Board of Ed. Don't take it to the Board of Finance.
Agreed. Thank you, Andy.
No say in that. It's not our area of responsibility, and it's not appropriate for us to jump into the middle of that as a board. Certainly okay for any individuals to jump in as individuals, but not as a board. So with that, if people can use the hand raise function, and Christine, and people.
Not seeing anything yet, but I'm sure there'll be. Okay. Devin.
Hello, Devin Weibel, 31 Woodland Drive. Just want to say thank you to the Board of Ed for really great, well, really to John and to Rydell and to parents for great. Yes, nothing is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're going to go from Christine.
Christine, I think you have everybody.
Sorry? There was a lot of feedback from Devin.
You have to yourself.
Okay.
Devin, you there?
Okay. Nope. Christine, you have to mute.
If you're
There we go. Okay. That's better now, right?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, perfect. So really quickly, again, Devin Weibel, 31 Woodland. First, I just want to extend a quick thanks to John and Rydell and to Clarence for an amazing job on the budget presentation. But second, to the Board of Finance, you know, I was an alternate last year and I know how many hours go into all the work that you guys do. So thank you for the many, many hours you'll spend over the next, you know, few weeks in preparing the budget for the town. And just quickly wanted to advocate for the board to really consider this budget and accepting the full 4.09% increase. I know you had a lot of great questions tonight, and I think you gave us so many good things to investigate and think about as a Board of Ed. But going into next year, there's just a lot of unknowns, especially around students' mental health and the need for really being able to support kids social, emotionally, and their mental health, and then just academically is pretty huge. And if we kind of get behind on that next year, the cost to the town actually would be pretty significant in the long run. So I think the investment now actually saves us money in the long run. So thank you for your time and thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Who's next, Christine?
I'm not seeing it. Oh, here we go.
Okay. Have you muted yourself, Christine? Good. Carolyn Oppenheim, Hunting Ridge Road. I am also
You just got muted, Carolyn. Did somehow you went on mute?
better?
Okay,
Got it.
there we
Am I
go.
back? Sorry.
Yep.
I want to thank both boards, both the Board of Education, the Board of Finance, for the amount of work that they will be putting in, they have put in and will put in. Also want to reiterate that Devin's thoughts that this is a very well thought out and well put together budget. They have truly shown how we can't really do much less, and our children deserve all the support that they can get in the coming years, in the coming year especially, but you know, in the years to come as well. Thank you again, and we hope that you will go ahead with this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. We have anybody else? That's it? Nobody else indicating they want to speak, Chris?
I am not seeing anybody else. I don't see any hand raising. Oh, Jenny.
Am I all set? Okay. Thank you to everybody on both boards. And Andy, I just wanted to thank you for opening this up for the opportunity to speak. You know, it's a departure from past years, and I think it's a really valuable opportunity, and I really appreciate it. There was just one thing during the discussion that struck me and I wanted to respond to, and that was with regard to class size at the elementary school, with regard to kindergarten versus fifth grade. Ideally, we would maintain the section in fifth grade and add a section in kindergarten and keep those class sizes small. But as a board, we're trying to be, you know, responsible with that kind of decision making. One of the things that I don't think is discussed enough about the elementary school is specialization. We have been a number of years now kind of in a constant yo-yo of cutting teachers when there's a class ahead of a larger class. And, you know, it creates instability in the staff, really depletes from the efforts that we invest into professional development and training. You know, we wouldn't necessarily take, you know, medical decision, you know, for yourself or a loved one for someone who switched back and forth between specialties. One season I'm going to do orthopedics, and then, you know, next year I'm going to do cardiac. You know, to move someone because it's complicated because of longevity and, you know, the time that somebody has been an employee of the building, and Kim has to take all the puzzle pieces and shuffle them around in a way it respects contract timing, and is best for teams and best for kids. And you could end up with a fourth grader moving down to kindergarten. And so I don't want us to disregard the time that it takes for teams to be effectively trained to work together as a group, develop the expertise in their specific grade level area. That takes time. And every time we make a decision to cut a teacher and then have to maybe move someone to another grade level, we're disrupting that process, and we're doing a disservice to kids. The absolute best way that we are going to glean the kinds of results that we are looking for and restore the potential gaps from this past year is to maintain the stability in our staffing, is to leave those teams as they are, to let them, effectively reflect on this past year and on prior years and make really sound plans moving forward. And if we disrupt those teams and we move people around, it's much more difficult for them to do. So I just want to advocate that we reach a point where we look at maybe 17 students versus 20 students, and we not focus so much on how many kids are in the classroom, but we think about the school and the grade levels and teams as a whole and what's going to be best outcomes that we're looking for. So thank you for hearing me out on that. And again, Dr. Harrison, John, I think you did a fantastic job tonight. Clarence, thank you for all of the hours that you're putting into preparing these materials, and look forward to the rest of the process.
Okay, thank you. Any more hands raised, Chris?
Not seeing any more. Just give them another minute.
Treat it like an auction. Going once. Going twice.
Nobody else.
Last chance until the public hearing on March 22nd then. And again, hope to see a good representative crowd at that meeting, and we'll look forward to a hopefully productive meeting that night. If no one has anything else, do any of the Board of Finance members have anything else, or any other Board of Ed, Rydell, Clarence, John, any other comments you'd like to make?
Just thank you very much for the great questions and sort of paths we followed tonight in conversation. Also, Clarence just sent both the sort of detailed Prouda and MMI data, and we'll get to work on the various avenues we discussed tonight.
Okay. Thank you very much. If there's nothing else, again, Board of Finance members, get your list to Christine of the departments you want to have further discussions with, and then we'll all see each other on the 22nd. And Mike, would you care to make a motion?
Yeah, I'm making a motion. So moved. A motion to adjourn. Sorry.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Say aye.
Goodbye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you, everyone. I think it was a productive meeting.